Hi, the topic for today's presentation is Web Services WSDL. WSDL stands for Web Services Description Language, and it is important for a business analyst or a developer or a tester to understand the various sections of a WSDL file. As a business analyst, you will define a WSDL file as a contract for the web service you are developing. As a developer, you need to understand the various sections of a WSDL file to generate the code and also to implement your service and also to come up with a client. As a tester, you will be pointing to a WSDL from your testing tool like SOAP UI to generate the test cases, then execute or send the requests out and to validate the response that comes back. WSDL does two things. Number one, it tells the consumer of a web service what the capabilities of a particular web service are. Secondly, it tells the consumer how exactly he can get the services, the physical address of the actual web service. And based on that, a WSDL file, which is an XML file, is divided into two sections at a high level. The first section is the non-functional section or the abstract section, and the second section is the functional and the actual physical section, which does things, or which at least helps the consumer to consume a web service. Or simply, to put it in simple words, the first section tells what this web service does, and the second section does how it does it, or how you can consume it. And since a WSDL file is an XML file, it can be easily read by a human or a machine. Coming to the first section, the root element of a WSDL file is WSDL definitions, and it is the container of all the other XML elements of a WSDL file. The first section under definitions is the type section. This is where you will define all your schema types. If you have watched my schema definition presentation, you already know what a complex type is, what a simple type is. So you define all your data types here, which you will be later on using to come up with your web service messages and web service operations. Once you define your types, you can use those types to come up with messages. Messages are like input-output parameters, and also like exception messages in Java or C# or any other language. Once you define messages, you will use those messages within the operations. So operations are analogous to methods in Java or .NET. And the port type element, which is weirdly named, is nothing but a container of all the operations within your web service. As you see, operation has an input message, so it in turn uses the message which you define here, which is nothing but a block of XML. And the output message similarly is another message which you define on the top, and similarly we have the fault message, which is used in case of any exceptions or any errors during the web service consumption. That is the first section. So this pretty much tells what this web service does and the structure of the messages. Moving on to the second section, the first element here is the binding element. A binding does two things. First thing is it connects the first section, the abstract section, to the actual physical section. So it has the port type, that is the link to the abstract section. And secondly, a binding allows you to define the protocol you want to use, and also a SOAP binding which you want as a developer or an analyst. What a SOAP binding does is it actually formulates the SOAP message at runtime. When your service is being consumed, it actually tells the SOAP engine how the message should be formulated. I'll be presenting this as a topic in one of my future presentations. Once the binding is defined, now we have everything we need for a web service. All that is missing is the actual physical location of the web service, and the port element within the service element exactly does that. So it actually provides a web service location URL, and looking at this URL, a client knows how to connect to the server and where to send all the requests. And all the services or the ports are grouped within the service element. a WSDL file can host many different web services, and all those services will go within the service element. So looking at this as a developer, we can compare this with the various language objects that are available. So the message, when you generate the client out of this, or when you generate your stubs out of this as a Java programmer or a .NET programmer, all the complex and simple types that you define in the types element basically get converted into simple Java objects like Java beans. All the operations elements are nothing but methods within the interfaces that get generated, and input-output messages. The input messages become the parameters of your method. The output messages are nothing but the return values of your methods, and the error messages get converted to a custom exception classes. It's that simple. So a WSDL file basically does two things. It tells the capabilities of a web service, and also how to consume or how to get connected to that service and get the services provided by that web service. And we started by looking at the types section, where you define all your simple and complex types that are required for your web service messages, and you use these messages to come up with the operations for your web service, and then you group all these operations under one port type element. That's the first part of a WSDL file. The binding element does two things. The first thing, it links the abstract portion of the WSDL file to the physical or the actual the important section of the WSDL file. Secondly, it allows you to define a SOAP binding, which allows you to define the protocol, and also the binding affects the message that gets generated at runtime. And the port element allows you to define the exact URL of your web service. And the root element of your WSDL file is the WSDL definitions. All these elements, the types, message, port type, all these elements fall into two namespaces, namely the WSDL namespace and the SOAP namespace from W3C. This is just a skeleton WSDL I have here. When we do a hands-on example, you can actually look at how a real WSDL looks like. And I'll be presenting the various web service standards, and also a hands-on example and web services testing in the future. Until then, keep sharing and learning. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.